All right. Welcome, everyone. We want to make the most use of our time this evening. And I want to extend a special welcome to those of you that are joining us on YouTube Live tonight. So in addition to our audience here, it's wonderful. At this time, I was just speaking with a colleague to celebrate our community. And even if you're not in this room with us, to have you online really speaks of the enthusiasm surrounding the Department of Art History here at UW-Madison. So that's a real pleasure and a real honor. So I am Anna Andrzejewski. I am a faculty member here in the Department of Art History who also has the privilege of coordinating this year's Centennial Events. I want to begin tonight by thanking our financial sponsors for this event, the Anonymous Fund here on campus, the Dean's Office and the College of Letters and Science, and generous donors to the Department of Art History. Tonight's event, in addition to being organized by the Department of Art History, is co-sponsored by the Chazen Museum of Art and also the Center for Design and Material Culture in the School of Human Ecology. Tonight's event is part of a series of events that are coordinated in conjunction with our department's 100-year, which is sort of amazing that we've been around for 100 years. This panel that you're going to be hearing from tonight is the third in a series of three that bring back distinguished alumni to campus. Last September, we brought back alumni to speak to us on the values of the digital and public humanities. In February, we had some curators here speaking on transformative curatorial practice. And tonight, as you know, we'll be hearing about campus art museums as learning labs from another set of curators, all of whom are alumni of our department. We've been doing this not simply to pat ourselves on the back and celebrate our illustrious history, but rather we've been inviting alumni back to help us think forward about how we can continue to serve students and the public here in the Department of Art History. And so I think it's really appropriate that our third and final alumni panel of this academic year is thinking about campus art museums and how they can serve students as learning labs on campus broadly, as well as the broader public. Our guests tonight, which I'll introduce here in a second, really do epitomize, as all of the alumni on these panels do, distinguished alumni. And I'm looking at them and I'm tearing up. One of them I already teared up with earlier today because I taught all three of them and at different moments in my life. And I think all of you have watched my daughter in various capacities at events, babysitting them among other things. But it's really wonderful to have all three of you back tonight. So as I introduce these three remarkable women, I'll introduce them briefly and then turn to the panel discussion, which will be moderated by my colleague, Berit Ness, who is the Chazen's Chief Engagement Officer and also an alum of the Department of Art History. So I'll be introducing them from left to right. So if you could just acknowledge by waving your hand as I introduce you, that would be great. Dr. Kendra Greendeer examines indigenous museum practices alongside land and materiality relations through an aesthetic emphasis on rematriation, an indigenous women-led initiative to return to a state of pre-settler colonial balance and relationship to those that allow for indigenous livingness. A member of the Ho-Chunk Nation and a descendant of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, Dr. Greendeer serves as the Ehlenfeld Curator of Collaborative and Community Exhibitions at the Weisman Art Museum in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Kendra has assisted with numerous exhibitions and community-based projects centered on Indigenous art and history. Dr. Greendeer received her Ph.D. in art history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2023. Keely Orgeman is the Seymour H. Knox Jr. Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at Yale University Art Gallery. She previously held other curatorial positions at Yale, beginning as a Marcia Brady Tucker predoctoral fellow in 2008. Orgeman graduated with a BA in art history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2003 and earned her Ph.D. from Boston University in 2014. And finally, Beth Zinsli is curator of the Riston Art Galleries, assistant professor of art history, and director of the Museum Studies Interdisciplinary Area at Lawrence University. Since 2013, she has overseen 3 gallery spaces and a collection of 6,000 objects, as well as the Teakwood Room, a historic room installed in Chapman Hall, and public sculptures around campus, including Otachia Crane 2021, designed by Oneida architect and artist Chris Cornelius. Dr. Zinsli received her PhD in art history from UW-Madison in 2014. So with that, I will turn it over to Berit for our discussion tonight. Thank you for moderating, Berit.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna, and good evening, everyone. As Anna so kindly introduced, my name is Berit Ness, and I serve as the Chief Engagement Officer at UW's Chazen Museum of Art. This evening's program title, Campus Art Museums as Learning Labs, inspires me because it hints at a different kind of relationship that one might have with a place like the Chazen or the Weisman or the Yale University Art Gallery or the Riston Art Galleries. One that is active, one that's reciprocal, and one that's generative. So tonight's conversation will lean further into the special qualities of academic art organizations through the perspective of these 3 curators who each bring their own idiosyncrasies into their role at their specific place. So I will ask the panelists about 3 to 4 questions as part of this evening's program. We'll probably organically have more conversation connected to that, but we'll also make sure to leave about 15 or 20 minutes for audience Q&A and broader discussion with all of you. Kendra, Keely, and Beth, thank you so much for coming back to Madison. It's such a treat to have you all here. By means of further introduction, could you share a little bit more about yourself and how your experiences here at UW-Madison helped prepare or inform what you're doing now? And we'll go in the same kind of order. Kendra, I'll start with you.
Yeah. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me to come back. It's great to be back in Dejope. While at UW-Madison, especially as a Ho-Chunk woman, coming back to this place, it gave me the opportunity to reconnect with ancestral teachings in addition to the Western education here at UW-Madison. And it really, for me, coming back here was a lot about building community, not only being a part of that community in different capacities, but also finding my own community here at UW-Madison. And I'm really grateful for those courses that did introduce me to folks in different departments, and to really carve out that space of folks that whose work did intersect these various spaces. So while at UW-Madison, I had the opportunity to connect with a number of different folks, not only on campus, but across the city, and really beyond in that, helped me to develop my curatorial practice. A lot of the different opportunities that came up for me were because of the folks I was engaging with on campus, and really it kind of gave me those tools to how to build community and how to navigate it while I was here. So yeah, I think that's
good. Hi everyone. And I just also, before I say any more, want to thank Anna and the entire UW history, it's art history, Department of Art History, for inviting me back here. This is the first time I've been back in 22 years. And it was, as Anna was alluding to, a very emotional experience to be back here. In fact, I took some of my lecture courses in this very room. So I have a lot to say. I have a lot of feelings about this place and what it's done for me. A lot of that connects to Anna, who was my undergraduate thesis advisor. I transferred to UW-Madison in the middle of my sophomore year. That was in spring of 2001. And by the fall, I took my first seminar with Anna, and that was on the topic of modernism in the United States, I believe, or modernism in America. And really, that changed everything for me. I knew coming in I wanted to be an art history major, but I really knew nothing about what I wanted to pursue, what I wanted to focus on. And I found Anna. I found other art history students who were equally passionate about American art. Liz McGoey is was a classmate of mine from 2001 to 2003 when she also graduated. She's now a curator at the Art Institute of Chicago. And we just both took as many opportunities as we could in being undergraduates here, finding the places on campus where we could become involved. I remember one of my first curatorial roles was working with the campus art collection here, which is separate from the museum collection, but seeing some of the paintings that were on view in the student union, I know, I thought, yikes. And learning how to frame, learning how to hang things on a wall, becoming involved with a group that brought in the contemporary artists to curate exhibitions at a small gallery space. I believe it was over at the Union. And then in my senior year, I had a curatorial job at Tandem Press. And that was really my first full-time curatorial experience. And then I was off to grad school after this. So I really have a lot of positive feelings about what this department has brought out for me in my career.
Thank you. Thanks to you both. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks to all of you for coming this evening. I'm grateful to be here. This question allowed me to reflect on the fact that the job I took at Lawrence is different than the job I have at Lawrence because I've made it my own in a lot of ways. Perhaps Lawrence didn't really realize what they were getting when they hired me, but that's fine. My experiences here, I'll talk about two. I had so many positive generative ones, but two things I really use now or that have served me well are all the curatorial projects I managed to carve out for myself and my colleagues. I often was co-curating with other people, and the three of us were speaking earlier about how curating is really a collaborative task, so that was very generative. But the cases in the Kohler Art Library, a niche case in the Chazen, an old ironworks factory on the east side of town that is now the Goodman Community Center. These were all opportunities that sort of we found and made for ourselves in order to practice curating, right? To find how to do that work, and that's been really wonderful. The other thing that I did a lot of as a grad student was grant writing to fund my research. And I do a lot of grant writing now to fund the projects I want to do on my campus. I am among the people who got news today that one of their grants, I have an NEH grant that we'll see if I get all the money for it, but to have that experience of writing grants has been really important for me doing my work on my campus. So those are just two things that I thought of. I also have a teaching appointment at Lawrence, and so TAing here was starting my teaching career here informs what I do in the classroom now as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. I wonder, just by way of a brief follow-up question, I want to also make sure that we are grounding ourselves in the specificity of your role and your institution. I wonder if you could just share a little bit more about what is the Weisman Art Museum? What are the Yale University Art Gallery? What are the Riston Art Galleries? And what do you do there on a day-by-day kind of basis?
Question. So the Weisman Art Museum, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to give dates, but it's been around for a while. It's at the University of Minnesota, and it does have a number of different collections, but more so its primary focus is as an American art museum. And that is like of the United States rather than any other part of the Americas. And on a day-to-day basis, each day can be very different. Typically, it involves that's even hard to just word anything typically.
I think as has been demonstrated by each of the different panels that have been part of this series, there is no standard day-to-day, often in museum work, often in curatorial practice. And so maybe the broader remit might be an easier question to answer.
Yeah. So I, as a community, a curator of community and collaborative exhibitions, I do force myself to meet with a new person in the community or in the university generally every week. I try to meet someone new. And often it does include a lot of grant writing, moving those projects along, as well as meeting with colleagues. So much, I think you'd already mentioned how collaborative museums are, and so it is very much a part of the Weisman's approach, as with many other museums, of how often you meet with your colleagues, be on the same page, make sure programming and all other elements of exhibitions are being developed with the art and curatorial focus in mind. So that's the main thing. Force myself to read and make sure I'm keeping up on some other things too. But yeah, I think I underestimated how much writing there can be, because there's plenty of labels or essays to be done too.
So the Yale University Art Gallery was founded in 1832. We bill ourselves as the oldest art museum on an American college campus. And when we were, I think my friend Catherine, who's in the audience, Catherine Alkauskas, who is at the chief curator at the Chazen, mentioned that Bowdoin might be it. I'm not sure. But we say we are the oldest museum, art museum on an American college campus. And the first building was constructed on what we call Old Campus, and then when the collection expanded, we moved into a new building in 1867. And at that point, the art museum merged with the art school, which was newly established. And that was the first art school on an American college campus. Now we have a collection of almost 300,000 objects, and that means we're one of the largest museums in the country, not just academic museums, but even with, in terms of civic museums, just behind the Met and the MFA Boston. As the head of the Modern and Contemporary Art Department, I oversee a collection of about 3,000 paintings, sculptures, and time-based media. Of course, there are other modern and contemporary works in the museum's collection, but we have what is considered an encyclopedic museum. So those modern and contemporary works might fall under prints and drawings, photography, African art, Asian art, etc. So I work with my colleagues on acquisitions, for example. We're trying to do more work together on installations in our permanent collection. The way that the galleries are configured at the moment means that those collections are relatively siloed right now, but we have plans to change that. On a daily basis, I would say that I work a little bit on acquisitions, thinking about acquisitions, thinking about permanent collection installations and rotations. I work a lot with students. I often teach. I teach in the museum. I choose not to teach in the History of Art department. It's just a bigger job than I can take on in my curatorial role. But some curators at Yale do teach in the History of Art department. I also run an artist in residence program that I can talk about more later. But one thing I want to say, just about curatorial work in general, is there might be a misconception that curators spend most of their time curating exhibitions and writing and thinking, but there's really not much time to do that. I spend probably 5 to 10% of my time on projects, special projects, and probably most of that work is done in my own time outside of work.
In terms of scale, my university and my galleries are the smallest of the three. I have a staff of 2, me and another person, plus a number of student workers who we are training to be museum professionals. No standard day, but if we are working on an exhibition, I am meeting with artists, talking to them to figure out how to best realize their vision. I'm meeting with students who I'll talk more about student-curated exhibitions, which is something I really want to focus on because I take a lot of pride in working with students on those, but meeting with students in independent studies to work through the ways they're researching and conceptualizing their exhibitions, which objects from our collection they want to work with, or potentially loans we may want to make for their exhibitions, going to lots of meetings. Working with donors, so our collection is 99% donation-based. Friends and alumni of the university have given lots of amazing things to our collection, which spans from ancient Greek and Byzantine coins to contemporary works on paper. So I have to do a lot of talking to the donors and a lot of research on the things they want to donate to see if they would align with our educational mission. And sometimes I have to figure out how to say no thank you to people. Grant writing, figuring out what initiatives in terms of conservation and preservation we're working on. So that's collection stuff. But I also organize all the programming in the galleries. So just last night we had a faculty colleague who just published a book of poetry, and he had a reading in the galleries. And his poetry book also had drawings and photographs by community members. So they also gave brief craft talks in the galleries, and it was an absolutely full house. There wasn't a square foot of space in the room. So those types of events, as well as artist talks and other things. So I feel very good about being small because we can be very nimble. We can do a lot of things and we have a lot of flexibility, but there's a lot of things to do.
So a big range on this panel, from a staff of 2 to one of the oldest and largest museums in the country. But although academic museums and galleries vary widely, it strikes me that they all tend to promote a different kind of engagement, with visitors rather than civic peers. It's meaningful to hear the ways, Kendra, you're reaching out to a new community member every week. And each of you, Keely and Beth, spoke about different kind of modes of working that might just be a little bit different, perhaps, than maybe some of our civic peers. So as a way to get at this question of thinking more deeply about access and inclusion, each of the panelists provided a couple of slides to give an example from their work about how access and inclusion shows up. So I'm going to dance over to the podium to forward through a couple of slides, and I believe, Kendra, you're some of the first examples to give in your practice.
Oh, and also for some more context, I started at the Weisman in July of last year. So I am relatively new. A lot of the accessibility that I'm sharing is part of the public engagement and learning department. They do a wonderful job incorporating access. So the image, the top left, is from our unveiling of Caption. It's a software that, the image on the right is actually what it looks like. So you're able to tap your phone against these caption labels, and those that have visual impairment or also are not fluent in English have the opportunity to change the language of the captions, also including like more line spacing or larger text. So that's just one example in how accessibility is being incorporated. There's also an open studio that includes a number of different interactive activities, as well as we have an art rental program. So students, faculty, even community members are able to rent works of art from our special collection. That's set aside for art rental. And I believe it's even just like $15 a month. Students are able to rent a piece of work for a year. And there's also sensory bags that are available at the front desk for, especially our current exhibition includes a lot of different media. And for those that it might be too overstimulating of an environment, that's available. Rentable headphones, iPads, and I think there's a lot of consideration for those that even like disclaimers that something might be that works might be emotionally charged. The public engagement department in particular is very mindful of meeting people where they're at and making art accessible to them, but also not trying to surprise anybody with what they might witness in the museum. A lot of that, I guess another thing to note, a lot of the exhibitions are very forward-thinking at the Weisman. Currently, Scene is on view, which is an exhibition that paired an incarcerated artist with an outside artist, and one explores like the life of prison, and the other side of the gallery explores that healing space of when people come out. So there are some very difficult topics that are able to be explored in that space, and really trying to meet people where they're at for the different themes. Also, just as far as access and inclusion, my position as a curator of community and collaborative exhibitions, I feel like that's getting easier now to say, but even just that is a move towards making the museum more accessible to folks. And next slide, please. So I did want to share at least the site I'm currently focusing on. So the Weisman is this Frank Gehry building alongside the Mississippi River, and it's right in the middle of campus on the East Bank. And so I don't know if you're able to see very well, but this little green space is actually where I'm currently developing an exhibition to be held. And so of course really imagining how to make the Weisman and the space on the university campus more accessible to folks, especially just bringing the museum outside to those that might not feel welcome or encouraged to come within the museum space. So that will actually be Indigenous, working with 3 Indigenous artists that are going to be creating works to activate that space outside and retell an Indigenous account of, really to celebrate the Declaration next year, the 250th anniversary, but from an Indigenous perspective and reclamation of this place. So, I don't have a ton of examples to share right now, but it's all to be determined, and will be projects that are in development right now. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you're new in your role, so it's incredible how much work you've already been doing. Keely, this is your next slide.
Yeah, so for my example, I have 3 slides. This, sorry that you can't see the caption down here. I wasn't sure how it would be projected. But Anna, in her introduction, mentioned that I started at the Yale Art Gallery in 2008. And although I'm now in the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art, I started in the Department of American Paintings and Sculpture. And in 2016, that department, at the time I was an assistant curator in the department in 2016, we acquired this portrait miniature. It's 4 inches tall by 3 inches wide. It is watercolor on ivory and dates to, well, we didn't know the date at the time of its acquisition, but it dates to, we believe, about 1837 or 38. And we know the artist, Sarah Goodridge, who was a prominent miniaturist practicing in Boston around 1800 to 1840 or so, when at that time, 1840, miniatures were sort of declining in popularity and photography was on the rise. In any case, I had the privilege of studying this object when I was a curator in that department. And what some of you might know is that these miniatures, which are, as I mentioned, watercolor on ivory, works on paper, fall under this category. They are light sensitive. So in museums, we put restrictions around the amount of exposure these works receive. So with a work like this, which is already so difficult to display because of its small scale, we also had the further challenge of figuring out when to make it accessible to the public, how to make it accessible, because you really have quite a narrow window of opportunity in which to display the work. And I was given the opportunity, the privilege of thinking of a way in which to display this. And we had nothing like it in our collection, so we had no other portraits of Black American sitters taken in this period. And that meant that if we were going to create some kind of context around this portrait of a woman whose name, a Black woman whose name we did not know at the time of the acquisition of the miniature, that we probably had to borrow works from other collections to create that context around it. And so I didn't know exactly where I'd go with this project, and I did assemble a checklist of other small-scale portraits of Black Americans from the 18th and 19th century, looking at private and public collections, and that became the foundation of my checklist for an exhibition. And then, Berit, if you could go to the next slide, I kept thinking about a way to bring contemporary art into this project. And as I was looking at the miniature and studying it, and this, I would say, just as a sidebar, is one, under the best circumstances at an academic museum, curators too have the opportunity sometimes to spend, long periods researching works in their collection. There was no rush to put this on view, so it meant that I had a long lead time to think about how to display it. In any case, I kept thinking about the work of an artist I really admired, Mickalene Thomas. This is Mickalene here on the far left, and the photo was taken in 2018 for her exhibition at the Wexner in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, and she's posing here in her exhibition with one of her paintings in the background, and she's standing in one of her installations with her then partner, Raquel Chavermont. And Raquel was often the subject of Mickalene's portraits. So Mickalene is best known for her portraits of Black women posing in lushly decorated interiors, domestic spaces. And she then, after graduating from the Yale MFA program in 2002, she began to develop a painting practice, so she makes paintings and photographs depicting Black women in these spaces, and now she has part of her art making is to create these immersive domestic spaces in which visitors can enter. So Mickalene kept coming to mind as I was looking upon this miniature and thinking about the pattern of the sitter's dress, her headscarf, even she's wearing, you probably couldn't see it in that image, but a pearl earring in her ear. And long story short, I invited Mickalene to come to Yale and look at the miniature with me, having in mind the idea that I would invite her to co-curate this exhibition with me, taking that checklist of historical small-scale portraits as the foundation, and then asking her to build a domestic space for the exhibition. And then, Berit, the next slide is our examples of, or rather installation views of the exhibition that we did together in 2023-24, called Mickalene Thomas, Portrait of an Unlikely Space. And at the beginning of the exhibition was, well, Kendra's sitting right here. Sorry, Kendra. But this is sort of
You're in and out.
yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. We didn't know when we were putting together these images. But it's the, yeah, okay. So so if you look in the corner there on this round rug, yes, thank you, with there's a chair and an ottoman and a side table. We displayed the portrait miniature in our collection front and center, and the exhibition kind of opened up from there. So this was a way to make that portrait accessible, make these portraits of other Black Americans from the 18th and 19th century accessible, and then we borrowed a selection of, I think it was 15 works by emerging Black American artists, and so it was really about, the whole show was about Black identity, and the title of the exhibition, Portrait of an Unlikely Space, gestured at the idea that, Yale, the Yale University Art Gallery, this old institution, historically white space, was an unlikely place in which to host an exhibition on this subject.
Thank you so much.
That sounds amazing. I really wish I could have seen it. So I'm at a very student-centered place, and so a lot of my work related to access and inclusion means giving the students access, right, to the objects in the collection. On the spectrum of access and preservation, I'm always going to find ways for students to interact with the real objects. I think that's really important at a place like mine. And in terms of inclusion, I truly believe that learning to curate is an inclusive pedagogy. It's something that is a way of sharing research and telling stories that enables people for whom, perhaps writing an essay isn't the best way for them to share that research and information. So I have examples of 2 student-curated exhibitions here. The first is based around a group of objects. It was curated by a student named Sarah Matthews, who graduated in 2023. It's based around a portfolio of textile samples that were part of the WPA Handicraft Project in Milwaukee. We got these through a merger with Milwaukee Downer College, a women's college in Milwaukee in 1964. There's very little research done on them. We didn't know a lot about them, which is the case with a lot of things that were collected before the galleries were established in 1989. And this student decided to dive very deeply into them, into these portfolios of lino-cut printed textile samples, which you can see on the walls, and was very determined to find the names of the women involved in the handicraft project that had otherwise not been published or printed. There was a well-known woman whose name I'm not remembering, who was sort of in charge of the handicraft project, who is well documented. But the women who participated, who were often, lower class women, women of color in Milwaukee, their names were not included in part of this as part of this documentation. So she found a lot of them by combing through census records of people whose profession is listed as Milwaukee Handicraft Project. But she also did a lot of wonderful, really rich formal work and investigating what are these samples, what is this portfolio of samples, what is it for? The Handicraft Project was created to make textiles for schools and hospitals and other settings, but we just had these squares. And through her research, Sarah discovered that 3 of the squares, which are shown right here, 3 of the squares in our portfolio were actually 3 of 4 that came together as a circus panel behind Keely here, and lo and behold, the Louise Allen Textile Collection here on campus had the complete thing, and so they were generous enough to loan it to us. But that was the result of a lot of research and digging, and the moment the student figured out, oh my God, this is part of a larger thing, was, the moment you live for. But she wouldn't have been able to do any of this had she not had access to these collections. She was one of our interns. She really was able to just come in whenever she wanted, essentially, and look through the portfolios and do lots of work. And the exhibition turned out wonderfully, and she was very thrilled, and I was thrilled to have the loan, so thank you, Sarah. But this was great. And then the other exhibition, if you wanted to go ahead, one slide, Berit. Also a student from 2023, Jin Han. We have, as I said, things in our collection that were donated before the galleries were established and before we were able to kind of say no thanks, before a lot of research was done on these things. And Jin was very interested in some of the objects in our collection that originated in Asia, and she wanted to dig more deeply into those. She was also very inspired by Fred Wilson and his work at the Maryland Historical Society, his exhibition, Mining the Museum. And so just as one example, or 2 examples of what she included in the exhibition is these 8 statues of 8 immortals. They're cataloged as being ivory. They're definitely not. I had my chemistry colleague use some kind of instrument to determine that they're not. So don't worry, that projector light shining on them is fine, don't worry. But she also had a very playful approach to this exhibition. And so the labels, you can see them on the sort of pedestals and stanchions, and the label included this note that, which is blocked, but essentially the names of these immortals, the way they're cataloged, but she said, but these are all sort of arbitrary in the catalog, so why don't you go ahead and just move the labels as you see fit, right? You name them what you think is right, because that's essentially how they were cataloged. You know, a colleague came up to me and was like, are you worried about this critique? And I was like, no, I think this is fabulous, right? This is exactly what I want to be happening. And then the other example, she took three of a group of woodblock prints that had been given to George Bonta, who is a Lawrence alum in class of 1910, given to him by Frank Lloyd Wright as a payment. Wright famously was not good at paying his bills, right? So he paid Bonta in these Japanese woodblock prints that he had also written on. He had inscribed what he thought the titles of the prints were. And she paired them with a black and white image of Taliesin in spring green, and then laid it all over a sort of wallpaper of these prints, thinking through things like fetishization of these prints over time. So giving Jen access to these objects and allowing her to think really expansively about what information we have and what we don't, and how to sort of pry apart what we have in our catalog was really wonderful. I have another slide, but it's for the next question, so I don't know if you want to.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, we got really excited about student curated.
I was going to say, you brought visuals for two?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. Well, I really appreciate such really generous examples from your practice, and I think that this gives us all a window further into it. I would love to dig in a bit further into this evening's program title, which describes museums as laboratories. This is an inherent kind of interdisciplinarity that springs to mind when I think about laboratory spaces and galleries as places for experimentation in so many of the ways that you've just described. I wonder, perhaps Beth, with you starting, if you could share how you and your colleagues work interdisciplinarily.
Sure, if you wanted to go to the next. So I took the idea of the lab seriously and brought an image of another. This was a collaborative curatorial project between a chemistry professor, a music professor, their shared student, a student from 2019, an art history professor, so a lot of, and her class, so a lot of different folks contributing, but the thrust of this exhibition is the connection between, music featured in manuscripts in our collection. And this chemistry vocal performance double major decided to take one bound manuscript in our collection, a German liturgical manuscript from the 1520s, and transcribe the music in it for a vocal performance, which she elected to perform and record in the racquetball courts to get the right acoustic resonance, as though she were in a cathedral. It was really striking. But she, as a chemistry major, was also interested in the pigments. And so she did instrumental analysis on the pigments in the manuscript. And so what you can see in the one behind me is some of the sort of images of what she saw under her microscope. And there's pedestals with sort of examples of the materials that would be used to make the pigments. And then two other antiphonary pages in our collection that other students had sort of written up labels about, and a photo of Nicolette performing the transcribed music in the racquetball court, accompanied on cello by the chemistry professor. Of some really wonderful, amazing colleagues. But this to me was a great example of sort of bringing a bunch of the work of several different disciplines to bear on objects in the collection and the generative knowledge that came out of it. We didn't know as much about the Nelson I manuscript, as we call it familiarly, as we do now, right? We didn't know, what these pigments were. She found a lot of other information. The art history students working on other music manuscripts in our collection also discovered lots of great things about some of the single leaves of music. So this was, to me, a really great example of the learning and the interdisciplinary work of the Campus Art Museum.
Thank you so much. Keely, I wonder how interdisciplinarity shows up in your work.
Well, I alluded to some of the interdisciplinary teaching that happens. I think that's probably the kind of peak of the intersections that happen between art history and other disciplines at Yale is through our teaching. And I have colleagues who lead most of the classes that come into the museum. I was looking at one statistic this morning that I found showing that there were 100 class visits to the museum alone in September of last year. And those classes come from all different disciplines across the university and from other local colleges and universities. So we do a lot of that interdisciplinary teaching. In my work, the way that shows up is mostly, through classes that I teach. You know, this semester I've done one with the School of Drama. One of my favorite courses to co-lead is with the English department, in which I pretend to be a trustee on our governing board, and the students have constructed arguments to pitch acquisitions, and it's part of their training to construct these arguments and experiment with being a curator for that day. So that's, I really enjoy that class. But, in the programs that we do for our exhibitions, often we're bringing in people from other disciplines for talks, for lectures, for in-gallery programs. And I alluded to the Artist in Residence program that I help to manage at the museum. And that's just, one way of bringing in practitioners to interact with our audiences. So, for example, in 2023, we acquired a work by the artist Maren Hassinger, and this was an outdoor sculpture that was not yet constructed. The acquisition was simply a set of instructions, and we, along with my colleague in the Modern Contemporary Art Department, Margaret Ewing, assembled a group of students to construct this sculpture outdoors. And so that that construction of the sculpture was part of their learning in a first year seminar. So these were students who they had not even yet declared a major, but they, none of them had yet expressed an interest in art history, but yet here they were at the museum for a whole week helping us to build this sculpture that was composed of branches and sticks that had been sourced from the Quinnipiac Preserve right by Yale University. And so that was a moment in which they could interact with Maren Hassinger's studio assistants who came for the week. And then Hassinger herself came back for a talk a couple months later to discuss this program with an even wider public. So that's just one way in which we, engage practitioners in our work constantly.
Fantastic. Kendra, I'm sure this question about interdisciplinarity when you're reaching out to someone every week really shows up in your work. Do you have an example to share?
It's all plans for later.
Yes.
So nothing final. But yeah, I feel like just considering interdisciplinary, I feel like that's so much a part of my own scholarship. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something that I've personally benefited from, and also feel like the direction we want to go more at the Weisman in particular. But I know, as you had mentioned, like at the other departments, that is very much a part of their practice already, especially with programs. Like there are scholars and folks from different fields. Also, previously in the curatorial department, there were a number of exhibitions developed with arts and science in mind, like even doing sleep studies and inviting in these other experts. And a lot of my, I guess a lot of my plans are considering how to develop other exhibition materials or do programs in it to complement exhibitions. But I feel like that's something that the museum, or Weisman in particular, will be moving more towards. So also another thing that really impacts that is the fact that we have a new director after 30 years of having the same one. So both us and other departments on campus are very eager to collaborate more and to find out where we can support one another. So yeah, I think it's going to be shifting quite a bit in the near future.
Thank you so much. So my last question before we turn it over for some audience Q&A, and we'll likely have time for 2, maybe 3 questions. I would like to acknowledge the current students who are in the room today, who may be considering different kinds of careers in museums. So I wonder what advice you might have for the next generation of museum professionals as they come into the field.
I guess my path to get to curation, like it was always the first thing I was initially interested in when I enrolled in my bachelor's program in museum studies. And, but I was really interested in how the other departments and areas functioned. So I, mostly throughout undergrad, took the opportunity to do different internships with different departments, especially in education, sort of visitor engagement, and also doing a fellowship in conservation as well. So I think it's been incredibly helpful to have that experience in different size institutions as well, to see really what fits and what really brings up that passion for you. For me, I have worked in very large institutions and have worked in very small institutions as well. So finding something right in between has been great. And even just taking the opportunity to dabble, even if it's not something you're initially very excited about, but even just to get your foot in the door. Because I think a lot of folks are very interested in the museum profession, but unfortunately, it does. A lot of times, it's the matter of how much experience you have. So, try all the departments and all the different museums to see what fits best.
That's very good advice. We've talked a bit about collaborative work. We've mentioned that a few times, and one piece of advice would be to always keep relationships at the center of your work, and relationship building and maintenance will be so important for you. You often, when curators create projects, there is this great moment where you recognize that you have your name attached to the project, and so you, the individual, is you have some kind of ownership over it. But when you step back from it, it's really important to recognize all of the efforts of so many people that went into that project, and acknowledging it will really serve you well. In fact, I just want to say that the Hassinger project I mentioned that was so student-centered and brought Marin into the museum, that was the work of my colleague, Margaret Ewing, whose name I mentioned. And my role in that was really to be supportive so that Margaret could pull off that project for the museum, and then I could be there to be in, there for Margaret for whatever they needed, and also, to continue the work of the other work of the department. So I just center relationships. And also, I would say, as a curator, think small initially. Think small, like the miniature. Maybe start with an object that inspires you, that speaks to you, that you think you could spend years, with, and then expand from there. I find some of the most interesting curatorial projects to be those that are really, they emanate outward from the work rather than start with the big idea and then, kind of try to find examples that fit within that idea.
Amazing. I have three. I'll be brief because I'm eager to hear the audience's questions. But the first is go to everything. So those of you who are here or are watching, your kudos to you. You never know when someone will share an idea that sparks something, or you'll make a connection or a relationship that's really important. The second is that museums and higher ed are slow to change. They are starting slowly to change, I guess, but they are institutions, and so remaining human-centered in all of your work is very key for me, and I think it would be for you too. And the third is learn how to read a financial report and propose a budget. It will serve you well. I had to learn that very quickly, and that was painful. So.
Such great advice. Thank you, everyone. Could you please join me in a round of applause for our panelists? So, Q&A. Does anyone have a question to start us off?
I want to know more about the name swapping on those statues.
Yes.
What's going on?
So they're very poorly cataloged in our collection. The newspaper image that was projected over two of them was from the local newspaper, the Post Crescent. And Jin figured out that the names that had been assigned to each individual one, while the names of the 8 immortals were arbitrarily assigned, not based on any attributes of the sculptures themselves. And so she wanted to play with that idea that the initial cataloging and initial receipt didn't accurately or thoughtfully connect the information and the objects. Does that answer your question?
They weren't even numbered?
They're numbered, but the name associated with each numbered one was not. And the 8 immortals, in her research and in her view, Jin is Chinese, she felt like they were not even accurate, really, depictions of the 8 immortals, and so the initial sort of gift, the initial sort of reporting about the gift was very suspect as well in terms of what they were. So and we have things like that in our collection, and so to have her doing that research was incredibly useful. Yeah.
It's really fun.
Yeah. She has a fantastic sense of humor.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, it sounds fun, and it also plays with the sense of like an authorial voice that we think about when we think about institutions. It as a mode of institutional critique starts to poke those holes in such a cool way.
Yeah.
Other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Sarah.
Thank you so much for these presentations. It's really wonderful to hear about your work, and I know it's inspirational for all of our students who are here today. One thing that I know many of us have been thinking about a lot in a museum context is thinking about what it means to share authority in a curatorial role. And I feel like some of the work that you've shared is absolutely doing that, but I wonder if you might be willing to reflect a little bit on sort of that responsibility that I think a lot of us feel as curators and professors trying to create great opportunities, not just for our students, but for broader community context, which seems like it's so much like what you're sharing, Kendra, in terms of meeting someone new every week. Like, how do we think about sharing authority in this work?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question is about these structures of authority that are often inherent in curatorial roles as well as professorships. And this question is asking how you seek to find strategies to share authority as you're baked into your own process, if that's right. Where are there opportunities maybe for the field to lean more into this idea of sharing authority? And then where are there also, as you know, Beth, you were describing these really, what it is to be a human within the institution, where are there challenges or limits to this idea of authority, accountability?
We had chatting earlier, museums are very opaque, unfortunately, right? There is a certain lack of recognition of the labor that's going into a lot of the exhibitions, and I think a lot of our examples deal with labor from many different parties, right, and many different people contributing. So maybe part of that would be acknowledgement of the labor, right, from the sort of intellectual curatorial component, but also the folks who are literally putting the things on the walls or repainting the walls or, sitting in the space, taking care of these objects day to day as guards of the space. So.
One way is to bring people in who are not employees of the museum, who have a different perspective, and also to involve students in projects and give them some sort of authorial role and access that they would not otherwise have. But the idea of bringing someone in is not, that's difficult, right? It worked out in my case, but I can think of a couple other examples in which that kind of outside collaboration did not go so smoothly. So it's something that, Margaret and I talk about often is sort of knowing who you're partnering with, doing your homework in advance, having conversations before you extend that invitation to become part of that authorial voice.
Thank you for your question. I feel like I can see it in different ways of prompts within exhibitions where people can give their feedback or what do you think about this? I feel like that's been one really successful way I've seen, but also I think even just with my work, I meet people where they're comfortable first as our initial meeting, and I think even just shifting that, usually enter the institution if you dare kind of approach, and I think just trying to shift some of those pre-existing structures that are already in place, and also I feel like I've been wrestling with this quite a bit in my budgets, but just to try to figure, I think even just recognizing the amount of labor that artists have had to produce in order to get to that point, and I think that's another area where that authority needs to break down a little bit more, and there to be a little bit more transparency with the artists that are being brought into the space. So I guess I can see little tweaks for the whole process, and but no, I think it's definitely needed to make museums welcoming for all. So yeah, I feel like they're every step along the way kind of slight shifts.
Yeah, we have room for one more question in the back.
Hi, thank you. So the three of you have a lot of like responsibilities. You know, you curate, you collaborate, you work with students, you manage. A lot of the time you might have a lot of cultural responsibilities, a lot of situations where you need to be respectful and think about how people walk through a space and experience a space, right? So I'm curious, how do you take care of yourselves?
That is such a great question that I'm going to repeat for the YouTube audience at home. So this final question is one that acknowledges the labor that each of you take as you curate, collaborate, work with students, manage people, are really deft and sensitive about organizing spaces and objects that have a kind of cultural responsibility and sensitivity. So the question is, how do you take care of yourselves at the end of the day?
Thank you for that question. I really like my job, but when I discover I don't want to go do it is when I think I'm getting burnt out. So that's my sign to do something. Lots of different things. Most recently, there's a community sauna that opened up in my community, so I'm good to that. But it really is like, you know, days off away from the space to reset.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Relationships, my relationships sustain me, and I make time for them. My family is in the audience. My parents are here. I connect with them as much as I can. And I've folded exercise into my life, which I, for many years, cut out because I didn't make the time. But I find the time now, and I feel so much better.
Thank you so much for your question. Along those lines, I have a 4-year-old who forces me to stop working every day. So that's that really helps me stay grounded. But also, I think just the fact that there is like a lot of physical distance from my job and like my home life, I live on a farm, and on the weekends we usually do some farm stuff. So it's also like very humbling to have that juxtaposition of spaces.
Well, that's such a lovely place to leave it. Please join me in another round of applause for our panelists. As a quick closing reminder, Dr. Greendeer is giving a talk tomorrow in this building at 4 p.m. It is free. You're all invited. So we hope to see you back here soon. Have a good evening.